Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Before the year 2022 got started, we already had plenty of reasons to be wary of paper and digital assets, and to stack real, physical, tangible hard money like gold and silver bullion. Massive government debts, runaway inflation, and debasement of the currency. That's all been on our radar for a while now, but if 2022 has taught us anything, it's that things can always get worse. And in honor of the tremendous amount of risk that's been injected into geopolitics and the world economy this year, in this video, I'm going to be covering 22 reasons to stack gold and silver in 2022. I'll be moving fairly quickly in this video, so if you want to dive a bit deeper into any of these topics, check out some of the other videos on my channel where I talk about them at greater length, and we've got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Okay, reason number one to stack gold and silver. All fiat currencies eventually fail. This is not specifically related to 2022, it's just a fact. In Ray Dalio's new book, The Changing World Order, he points out that of the 750 currencies that have existed since 1700, only 20% still exist today, and they've all been devalued at one time or another. The dollar itself has lost over 96% of its purchasing power since the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. Gold and silver, on the other hand, have roughly the same purchasing power today as when they were first used as money by the Lydians in the 7th century BC. I say roughly because it is kind of hard to compare a modern industrial economy to one from 2,700 years ago, but it is safe to say that there is no paper currency that has retained any kind of purchasing power whatsoever over that same time frame, or anything even close to it. Reason number two, gold and silver are a great way to save. Okay folks, you can see I'm throwing some softballs to get started here, but don't worry, we'll get to the juicy 2022 SHTF stuff here in just a minute. But it is true, and it has always been true, that gold and silver are a great way to save money. And, Mike Maloney will tell you that if you're saving dollars, you're not even really saving money, you're just saving currency. Because money has to be a store of value, and fiat currencies almost always end up succumbing to the forces of inflation over the long run. And not only do precious metals protect your savings from losing purchasing power, if you're stacking physical metal, there's also that little extra difficulty of liquidating a physical position that might make you think twice before dipping into your savings. Reason number three, geopolitical instability. See, I told you the 2022 stuff was coming, and I don't think I need to elaborate to anyone out there what I'm talking about. The fact that we have a land war in Europe is really quite a dangerous situation, and it's very understandable why investors would bid up safe haven assets like gold and silver in the event that the ongoing conflict in Eastern Europe escalates any further. But it's not just Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There are other hotspots around the world that could add even more risk to the current situation. Notably, the ongoing conflict between Saudi Arabia and Yemen's Houthis has the potential to disrupt world energy supplies at any moment, as we saw when the Houthis attacked a Saudi Aramco oil storage facility last weekend. And we can't forget about the Chinese, who I'm sure are busy taking notes as they watch Russia's invasion unfold, to see if there are any lessons for them as they plot to annex Taiwan. And this leads us to reason number four to stack gold and silver, sanctions and supply chain disruptions. Russia is a major producer and exporter of many commodities. Following the invasion of Ukraine, Russia was slapped with the most aggressive package of sanctions in modern history, and this triggered a sharp rise in the price of many raw materials. Although the spike in commodities following the invasion has moderated somewhat, if this conflict goes on for a protracted period of time, we will likely see shortages develop in a variety of materials as existing stockpiles are consumed. In fact, we may already be seeing the early signs of a silver shortage, with the US Mint recently canceling its 2022 production of Morgan and Peace dollars, a move that it blames on pandemic-related supply chain disruptions, but I'm not so sure about that explanation. Reason number five, rising energy costs. Two of the most important commodities Russia exports to the world are natural gas and crude oil. Russian imports alone account for nearly a quarter of the European Union's energy supplies. At the time I'm making this video, Ukraine's President Zelensky is calling for a total embargo of Russian oil and gas, and Vladimir Putin is insisting payments be made in rubles. If either side ends up cutting off Russian energy from Western markets, already high energy prices could skyrocket much higher. What does this have to do with precious metals? Well, mining is an energy-intensive activity, and if the cost of production for gold and silver moves up, that means less will be produced, the supply will be smaller, and prices will necessarily rise. High energy prices tend to bleed over into other materials, and gold and silver are no exception. And if you're enjoying this video so far and you're getting some value from it, please do give it a big thumbs up down below, and while you're at it, why not subscribe to the channel? Alright, reason number 6 to get your hands on some physical gold and silver: cyberattacks. Another risk of the escalating conflict between East and West is the possibility of a cyber attack. On March 21st, President Biden issued a warning to prepare for cyber attacks, based on intelligence reports that Russia may be planning a cyber attack against critical U.S. infrastructure. Should an attack of this nature target the banking and financial sector, it's not hard to imagine that digital assets may become inaccessible. Electronic payment processing may not work, bank lobbies may close, and ATMs could be rendered inoperable. In an age of nearly complete dependence on electronic records and payments, it seems to me it would be wise to have your hands on some cash and also some hard money assets without counterparty risk like gold and silver. Reason number 7, record trade deficits. In January of this year, the U.S. trade deficit for goods hit a new record high of $1 trillion. Our single biggest export, by a large margin, is fiat currency. And it should be clear to everybody for obvious reasons that this is not a situation that is sustainable. There is going to come a time when foreign nations stop selling us real goods for paper IOUs. This will have serious implications for the purchasing power of the US dollar, and it leads us into reason number 8 to stack gold and silver in 2022, de-dollarization. Nations around the world are beginning to look at alternatives to the US dollar. Saudi Arabia is contemplating selling oil to China for yuan. Reuters reported back on February 25th that India was exploring setting up rupee-based trading accounts with Russia, and recently, Pavel Zavalny, the head of the Russian government's Committee on Energy, was quoted as saying, "The dollar ceases to be a means of payment for us. It has lost all interest for us," calling the greenback no better than candy wrappers. This was shortly after Zavalny had discussed Russia accepting hard currency, which he clarified to mean gold, as payment for Russian oil and gas. For the past 50 years, payments for oil around the world have been settled exclusively in dollars, creating significant demand for U.S. currency. If oil payments begin to be settled in a variety of currencies and instruments, and it looks like that's the direction we're headed in, then that demand for dollars will disappear, and the dollar's value will decline as a result. And that brings us to reason number 9 on our list: a new monetary paradigm, which is what we may be on the cusp of. We are currently living through a fourth turning, a tumultuous season in which long-established institutions are overturned and replaced. The 51-year reign of the dollar as the world reserve fiat currency may well be coming to an end soon. That doesn't even necessarily mean that the dollar is going to go away, but an extreme devaluation and loss of world reserve currency status could be just as bad. What the new monetary paradigm would look like is uncertain, but physical precious metals may be one of the most effective vehicles for transitioning wealth from one side to the other. And what might the dollar look like in this next paradigm? Well, that leads us to reason number 10 to get out of fiat currency and into hard money: central bank digital currencies, also known as CBDCs. A CBDC is a digital token, similar to a cryptocurrency issued by a central bank. They are pegged to the value of that country's fiat currency, and many countries are in the process of developing these. On March 9th, President Biden went so far as to sign an executive order to encourage the exploration and the implementation of a US dollar CBDC. You may also hear this referred to as the Fed coin. And 1 week later, the Bank of Canada announced a joint project with MIT to develop its own CBDC. So it seems likely we will be seeing a central bank digital currency in the near future, and I would not be surprised if we see this coincide with a financial crisis and also the rollout of some sort of universal basic income, distributed in the CBDC. And if you think central banks and governments have gone overboard with what they call stimulus in the past, just wait until they can immediately distribute digital currency to individual citizens' wallets with the touch of a button. A CBDC will lead to significant currency debasement and also will be completely trackable. So physical gold and silver may be a way to preserve not only your purchasing power, but also some measure of your privacy. Now, if things get really bad with the conflict in Ukraine, we may need silver for a somewhat different reason. Reason number 11, bartering after SHTF. Now, in my experience, preppers are divided into two different groups, those who stack silver and the ones who are wrong. Just kidding. I understand that for anyone preparing for some kind of Mad Max scenario, there are a lot of items that will take priority over gold and silver bullion. It's almost become a sort of trope among some members of the prepping community that if you have gold or silver, you'll either starve because you can't eat it, or someone with guns will come along and take it away from you. Now, to me, the solution to this dilemma isn't to abstain from stacking precious metals, it's simply to stack food and weapons as well, and also to know how to defend yourself and to be in good enough physical condition that you'll be able to survive the rigors of some disaster scenario. I also think it's important to acknowledge that no matter how bad things get, there will always be some measure of commerce and economic activity so long as humans are alive and in contact with one another. To that end, bartering can work, but it's extremely inefficient, and precious metals are a form of money with intrinsic value that society could revert to using in the absence of confidence in any paper currencies. In Venezuela, for example, I personally know individuals who have made ends meet and kept themselves housed and fed by selling precious metals, even after all of their savings in bolivars were destroyed by hyperinflation. Moving on to reason number 12 to stack gold and silver in 2022, growing industrial use. And this one really applies to silver more than gold. Silver has a number of unique properties which make it useful for industrial applications. It's the best conductor of electricity and heat of all the metals, it's highly reflective, resistant to corrosion, extremely ductile and malleable, and to top it all off, it is both non-toxic to humans and naturally antimicrobial. Every small electronic device you have contains small amounts of silver, and quite a bit is thrown into landfills every year, where its recovery would only be viable at much higher prices. In an era of electrification, connectivity, and new technological breakthroughs, the industrial consumption of silver is likely to continue to increase. Reason number 13 is an industrial application of silver worthy of its own bullet point: electric cars. In January of 2021, the Silver Institute published this report titled Silver's Growing Role in the Automotive Industry. And for anyone who wants to read it, I'll put a link in the description. The report goes into significant detail about how silver is used in the production of electric vehicles, but I'll just give you a quick rundown of the most salient points. The average internal combustion engine vehicle contains somewhere in the range of 14 to 28 grams of silver. Hybrid vehicles use slightly more with 18 to 35 grams each, and electric battery vehicles require 25 to 50 grams each. These may seem like small numbers, but all that silver adds up. In 2022, the automotive industry alone is forecast to consume over 60 million ounces of silver, and this report projects that number will continue to climb as electric vehicle manufacturing increases. Rest assured, regardless of how you feel about electric vehicles, they will continue to be manufactured. The Biden administration continues to promote Green New Deal policies despite record energy prices, and one of the president's recommendations to Americans struggling with rising gas prices: buy an electric car. You'll save about $80 a month. Never mind that most people don't have a spare $60,000 lying around to buy said electric vehicle. And of course, electric vehicles aren't the only darling of the Green New Deal. There's also solar panels, which happen to be number 14 on our list. As we can see here in this data provided by the Silver Institute, industrial consumption of silver for photovoltaics has nearly doubled over the past decade, rising from 55 million ounces in 2012 to more than 100 million ounces last year. The Department of Energy published a document titled The Solar Future Study last year that claims solar energy could provide up to 40% of U.S. electricity by 2035 as part of a campaign of decarbonization. I'll put a link to the report in the description for anyone who wants to check that out. Personally, I feel that if this move is directed by government rather than market forces, it has a lot of potential to be a boondoggle and to lead to much higher energy prices and the squandering of resources. But that doesn't mean they're not going to try. And that also means that a lot of silver could end up being consumed by manufacturing all of these solar panels. And it's not just in the US. Calls for green and alternative energy development have been quite loud recently in the EU, as European dependence on Russian oil and gas has suddenly become a rather uncomfortable reality. Alright, reason number 15. We're done talking about industrial applications of silver. Now we're going to talk about a real cheery topic, the national debt. The US national debt has now climbed to over $30 trillion, more than 125% of US GDP. And with an annual deficit greater than $2 trillion, it's not going down anytime soon. The debt has gotten so bad that it is essentially unpayable. That leaves two options: a US debt default, an unthinkable event that would lead to economic calamity, or paying the debt off in currency debased by massive inflation. And we'll talk more about inflation in just a moment, but not before we talk about reason 16 on our list, unfunded liabilities. Because if you thought $30 trillion in debt was bad, how about $168 trillion worth of payments the US has promised to make but has no money to pay? Things like Social Security, Medicare, federal pensions, and veteran benefits. If the national debt is unpayable, the idea that we can make good on these obligations is an absolute joke. Alan Greenspan himself acknowledged this reality in congressional testimony.
And we can guarantee cash benefits as far out and at whatever size you like, but we cannot guarantee their purchasing power.
So, sorry folks, but if you're counting on Social Security for your retirement, you might want to stack some gold and silver as a plan B, just in case. Alright, now we can get to inflation, because it's number 17 on our list. Why should we be concerned about inflation? Well, last month, year-over-year inflation, as measured by the CPI, hit 7.9%, a 40-year record high. While the Fed and the Biden administration have been content to blame rising prices on the health crisis that must not be named, and now on Vladimir Putin, to find the real culprits, they need only look in the mirror. As Milton Friedman once said, inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, in the sense that it is and can be produced only by a more rapid increase in the quantity of money than in output. And this time is no exception. Rising prices are merely a symptom of inflation. The actual inflation itself is not of prices, but rather of the money supply. And a time-honored way to protect one's purchasing power from inflation, especially over the long run, is to stack precious metals. Now, Fed Chairman Powell may be talking a tough game about getting inflation under control, but I remain skeptical. However, that does lead us into number 18 on our list, rising interest rates. I think a lot of investors actually believe Jerome Powell when he says that the Fed is committed to getting inflation under control. On March 16th, the Fed raised the federal funds rate by 25 basis points, or 0.25%. Now, how a move like this is supposed to get inflation of nearly 8% under control is beyond me, but that's the narrative we're hearing from the Fed and mainstream media alike. I suppose the idea is that the Fed will be making a number of these small rate hikes in succession, and that should do the trick. If we take a look at history, however, we can see that the last time the Fed embarked on a rate hiking crusade to get the forces of runaway inflation under control back in 1979, Fed Chair Paul Volcker had to crank the federal funds rate up to nearly 20%. This move did manage to quell inflation in the long run, and it's also important to note that this big move up in interest rates was initially quite bullish for precious metals, with gold and silver making their biggest bull run of all time shortly afterwards in early 1980. This time around is quite a bit different though. US debt levels are drastically higher now than in 1979, and I forecast that it will be impossible for the Fed to raise rates enough to get inflation under control. Rather, I think it is much more likely that these rate hikes will break something in our over-leveraged economy first, and when that happens, we will be getting more of reason number 19 on our list, quantitative easing and stimulus. I have no doubt that when the asset bubbles that have been inflated by the Fed over the past decade find a pin, and bubbles always find a pin, the Fed will be right back at it, coming to the rescue with the only real tool in their arsenal, the printing press. Currently, rising food and fuel prices are probably the top concerns for your average American, and so it's convenient for the Fed to talk a tough game on inflation. But if home prices begin to collapse, if equities tank, if workers begin to see the value of their 401ks evaporate, inflation will cease to be the top concern, and the Fed will do what it always seems to do these days when faced with a crisis. It will do everything in its power to pump those bubbles right back up, and one thing about monetary stimulus, in order for it to be effective, it's got to be bigger than the previous round. And the last round that we had was pretty darn big. Next time around, I'd expect the Fed to cut rates back to zero, but considering the low level that they'll be cutting from, that will almost certainly not be enough. There will be more quantitative easing as well, with the Fed purchasing treasuries and possibly even intervening in equities markets with the direct purchase of stocks. I'd also expect direct stimulus payments to voters, possibly in the form of some CBDC like I mentioned earlier. The point is, they're going to be creating a lot more fiat currency, and before they do that, I want to accumulate precious metals, especially silver, considering how cheap the price currently is. And speaking of low silver prices, that leads us to reason number 20 to stack precious metals. Metals markets are manipulated. Now, before you think I'm going all tinfoil hat on you, the manipulation of metals markets is well documented at this point. Back in 2020, JP Morgan, who also happens to be the custodian of the SLV Silver ETF, was forced to pay nearly $1 billion in fines for manipulating precious metals markets. But more recently, we saw an even better example of how rigged commodities markets really are, with the LME shutdown of nickel trading on a record short squeeze. Just a few weeks ago, the London Metals Exchange completely halted trading in nickel, all to save Chinese billionaire Chang Guangda, whose large short position in the metal had blown up in his face and threatened to bankrupt him. But his pals on the exchange didn't let that happen. Instead, they prevented traders with long positions from realizing their profits, saved their billionaire buddy, and in the process, they revealed that the purpose of commodities exchanges has nothing to do with fair price discovery. Rather, these markets are controlled by the ultra-wealthy for their own benefit, and they are more than willing to change the rules at any minute to suit their own interest. The fact is that for every ounce of gold that gets mined, over 100 ounces of paper gold is traded, and for silver, it's more than 300 ounces of paper for each ounce of physical metal. But that's okay. If precious metals are being held artificially lower by manipulative tactics, this is actually a huge opportunity for stackers. As Greg Manarino likes to say, let them play their games and we'll play ours. I suspect that before long, it will become clear just how crooked these paper markets are. And I would not be surprised if we see a blow up in the precious metals markets, just like we saw in nickel. And once that happens, real price discovery will occur, and those prices will be much higher. So physical gold and silver metal is definitely where I want to be, not paper derivatives or future contracts. And, there are other benefits to physical bullion as well, such as reason number 21 on our list, collectibility and premiums. Because some physical bullion products such as coins and bars actually offer a twofold hedge against inflation. They give you exposure to the underlying price of the precious metals, but also the bullion itself often carries a bit of a collectible premium. 90% junk silver is a great example of this. These old US coins from 1964 and earlier are 90% silver, and when I began stacking, these coins were actually one of the cheapest, lowest premium forms of silver you could get your hands on. Today, though, they carry a significant premium to the spot price. Whether you are buying or selling, junk silver now goes for 20 to 25% over the spot price of silver. These coins have a limited supply, they haven't been minted in over 50 years, many of them have been melted down over the decades, and because of this dwindling supply, they have increased in value faster than the price of the metal they contain. And that's something you will only see with physical gold and silver. There's no silver ETF or futures contract that has a collectible premium. So that is one more reason you want to get your hands on physical metal. And finally, reason number 22 to stack gold and silver in 2022 is because owning real money is awesome. Stacking bullion is liberating. It removes your wealth from a crooked financial system that is rigged against you. It allows you to become your own central bank, and it lets you hold wealth in a form that is outside of anyone's control but your own. In a time of growing uncertainty and risk, in an age when governments and central banks seek to increasingly exert control over their populations and their economies, holding what has been the money of free people throughout history can at least bring you some peace of mind. And none of this is financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just sharing with you my thoughts, and although this was a fairly lengthy list, I'm sure I left something out. So if you've got some other reasons to be stacking gold and silver in 2022, let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more videos about precious metals and what's going on in the world economy, then check out the videos popping up on your screen right now. Thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe and happy stacking. I'll catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.